Okay, so we're now streaming live. Hi everyone, my name is Randa Omar. Thank you for joining us for our final session of the What's Next series. This series aims to provide students with some insight to the career steps that various alumni have taken to arrive at where they are today. I'll now read our land acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years. It has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, the digital space and conceptual space that we are meeting in, as well as the meeting place of Toronto, are still the home of many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live on and work on this land. While we recognize that not everyone is sharing the same space during this time, we encourage each of you to take the time to think about, learn, and reflect upon where you are and the Indigenous peoples who have lived here and are currently here, and the future generations who will live here. As people living on this land, it's essential for us to reflect the ethos and respect that the Indigenous communities show towards the land and towards each other. We must show support through our actions, not just our words, for those of us who are occupying this land. I'd just like to mention a few things before we start. As you've noticed, we've chosen not to use the webinar format to foster a more interactive environment. We'd like to remind you to remain muted during the presentation, and there will be an opportunity for everyone to engage in dialogue afterwards. So if you'd like to ask a question, please use the chat function, and we will take incoming questions in chronological order for the Q&A at the end. And then also during the questions period, we can kind of call your name and you can unmute yourself and ask your question. So I'll start with, we're very happy to have Safoura, Zahedi, and Rafson today, and I'll start by introducing Safoura. So Safoura is a designer, super cool with a background in architecture and interior design and experience on a diverse range of projects, including residential, commercial, institutional, cultural, and civic buildings. Her award-winning independent work operates at the intersection of art and architecture, exploring geometry as a universal design language and digital fabrication. She's highly committed to the design community and acts as programs director at the Design TO Festival and executive committee member at BEAT, which is Building Equality in Architecture Toronto, where she co-founded the annual BEAT Forum devoted to addressing issues of diversity and inclusion in the design and architecture industry. In addition, Safoura is currently a part-time lecturer at the Rafson School of Interior Design. So welcome, Safoura, if you'd like to start your presentation.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks. I'm going to start sharing my screen just before I get started. So thanks, everyone. I just want to first start off by thanking you for inviting me to be here tonight. It's wonderful to get to know you guys, and I think this is such a great event series, and it's a pleasure to be here. So as I was kind of thinking about what I might share tonight and reflecting on what I've done since graduating in 2016, I realized really I can kind of focus and summarize my work and activity under three kind of main categories. And these are independent work, which is independent art and design experimentation, involvement in the design community and kind of dedication to issues of equity in the profession, and also, of course, the pursuit of architectural training. And really my experience and work in these three kind of spheres have, of course, often overlapped and also complemented each other. But really the roots of all of this involvement began during my master's at Daniels. But before I go into kind of my work after graduation or even during Daniels, I wanted to share some things about me kind of pre-masters that have also informed my work and career. The first is that I'm a first-generation immigrant. I was born in Tokyo, but grew up in Tehran, Iran, up to the age of 7 when my family immigrated to Canada. And I've lived in Toronto since. However, I can definitely say that my earliest design inspirations were of the amazing kind of arts and crafts and designs and architecture that I saw growing up in Iran, especially in the city of Isfahan, where my parents are both from and that we often visited. And throughout design school, I continued to be inspired by this rich kind of design and architecture of that region. For me, it was not only a rich alternate kind of body of work to learn from that I was not really being exposed to in the kind of Western Eurocentric focused curriculum, but also it was a way for me to connect back with my cultural roots and identity, kind of growing up here. And for my undergrad, I studied interior design at Ryerson. It offered me a great solid design foundation. Many of the projects were architecturally focused, and this made me curious about the kind of architectural scale of projects. And I didn't like the idea of only being a part of just the interior scale and wanted to really be involved in the kind of micro and macro of projects. This ultimately led me to getting a master's of architecture at Daniels. But really, I should say the decision wasn't so crystal clear at the time, and we can talk about that later if we have time. So moving on to kind of my experience during my master's, I was really intentional during my master's to find opportunities to learn more about design and architecture connected to my cultural heritage. And for me, this included not only Iran, but various Islamic regions. At the time, so anytime that there was an opportunity to select my own topic or case study for a project, I tried to take advantage of it. There are so many examples of this. One that I can remember right now, seeing Mason also as part of the audience, is an elective that I took focusing on the kind of different architectural typologies, for which I chose the typology of a mosque. So there was a lot of opportunities like that I was able to take advantage of. The other thing was, it was really important for me to develop a strong network in school, not only with my fellow students and but also the faculty. And Daniels really did offer a strong network that I benefited from while I was in school, and to this day. I had the pleasure of working with many faculty members, some of whom I had as professors and others who I approached because I was interested in them and their work. This included Aziza Chowni through the Designing Ecological Tourism program at Daniels, where there's some images here on the left, where I also had an opportunity to travel to South Africa for this specific project, which was a science center located in Rustenburg, just outside of Johannesburg, mining town. And I could say that that project really was kind of my first exposure to the inclusive design kind of process as part of an architectural exercise. And then I also had the pleasure of working for others like Mason and Lola Shepherd at Lateral Office. I worked with Stephen Fong. I also worked with Dermot Nash at Moriyama and Tashima Architects. And, you know, all of these kind of work opportunities for me, I really was focused on trying to learn from the faculty, not only in the classroom, but outside of the classroom if I had the opportunity to work with them. With Dermot, I actually TA'd for his class, which I'm sure you're all taking or will be taking. And in chatting with him one time after one of the classes, he was telling me about a competition that they were doing at the time located in Mecca in Saudi Arabia. And I think I expressed some opinions and basically asked him if they were looking for any student interns, and they were. And at the time, that worked out really well for me because I had decided to delay my thesis to the winter term. So I took my time in the fall working at MTA on this project in Mecca, and at the same time, kind of brainstorming ideas for my thesis. And for my thesis, I knew that I wanted to focus on a topic I would be interested in kind of continuing to pursue beyond thesis and Daniels. And it was, for me, I had the opportunity of dedicating the project to exploring, for the first time, really more deeply Islamic architecture, but more specifically learning about the physical and metaphysical roots of Islamic geometry. And I developed a design process to kind of translate traditionally two-dimensional Islamic geometric patterns into three-dimensional spatial experiences that captured the essence of universal multiplicity within unity, which is essentially the underlying kind of philosophy of Islamic geometry. This design process and my thesis really did involve my interest in Islamic geometry, but also in digital fabrication. And the intent was to kind of move this body of work that I was studying, or I guess what is traditionally kind of nostalgic applications of Islamic geometry, towards a more innovative contemporary architectural approach that was not just limited to the Islamic context, but actually universally applicable. And I had the pleasure of having Benjamin Dillenberger and Brady Peters and also David Lieberman as my advisors for my thesis. And the reason I'm sharing this is because really my thesis formed the basis of my independent art and design work, which I'm still pursuing and is still in its early stages, but plan on pursuing more seriously as time goes on. My first exhibition of my personal work was actually while I was still at Daniels through the work that I was doing in Benjamin Dillenberger's studio with 3D printed sandstone. Some of the pieces were exhibited in the 3D Excel exhibition organized by the Design Exchange and also at the B3D conference. But my first solo exhibition was in 2018 when I was accepted as a guest designer to create a window installation as part of the Design TO Festival. It ended up receiving a Design TO People's Choice Award, which was great. And then based on this work in 2019, I was commissioned by the Gladstone Hotel to create an installation to be exhibited for a full year. And it was also part of the Come Up to My Room and Grow Up exhibitions. And it was really a great experience for me to be able to expose this work to a broader public audience and see how they would connect and react to the work. And since then, I've received some private commissions for the art and design work, but I'm excited to kind of move this body of work forward. Next is the kind of my involvement in the design community, and really my personal art and design work connects directly with my interest in this intersection of design disciplines and involvement in the design community at large, which I've been able to do as part of Design TO and BEAT. And as Rhonda mentioned, I'm an awards coordinator and programs coordinator at the Design TO, and I've been part of the Design TO team for over 7 years now. So that also started during my master's. And I'm also an executive committee member at BEAT, and I've been a part of BEAT for 3 years now. Both of these volunteer positions have allowed me to create platforms for addressing issues that I didn't see being addressed in the kind of 9-to-5 life of architectural practice, but that I found were important issues that I wanted to learn more about and realized I need to kind of create space for them. And I was lucky enough to be able to do that as part of these amazing teams. And this year with the Design TO Symposium, our topic was inclusive design, and we were able to invite 9 multidisciplinary experts for a discussion about inclusive design, covering inclusive education, the business case for inclusion, accessible technologies, co-creation, and many other topics, which was really well received. We had over 300 kind of participants who purchased tickets to be part of this event. And my involvement with BEAT, of course, I really joined BEAT. I knew, of course, of their work, that they were doing amazing kind of programming centered on gender equity. And I ended up approaching Camille Mitchell, who at the time was kind of one of the leads as part of the BEAT team, to start a forum series that would be focused on addressing issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion. So beyond issues of gender in the architecture and design industry. And in the last 3 years, we've held events at OCAD as part of the RIAC Festival, and of course this year virtually during COVID. And really this volunteer work has given me opportunities for a lot of other kind of engagements, like this one, I should say, that I might have not otherwise been involved in potentially, but also it really does for me provide a kind of personal balance of the 9-to-5 kind of work of architecture, and then also addressing these very important kind of human-centric issues beyond just architectural practice. And so kind of leading into architectural training, after graduating from my MArch program, I continued to work at Moriyama and Teshima Architects for almost 3.5 years. It was very important for me to get my OAA license, so I started logging hours as soon as I could. And I passed my exams currently and will be licensed soon. And while I was at Moriyama and Teshima, I was able to gain a lot of experience on a wide range and types of projects, wide scale and types of projects, I should say, which for me was really valuable. So I worked on projects that were kind of ranging from a master plan project in Qatar to an educational building in Halifax that you see the image on the left here, to kind of the odd residential renovation project, to the Canada-US kind of border crossing, and there's on a lot of different scales in between. And this range really was great for me. And over the years, I came to learn what type and scale of projects I enjoy most. And that was great. And I can definitely kind of speak more about this during our Q&A if people are interested. But over the years, I found that I enjoyed projects that served the public. And I also enjoyed working at the kind of small to medium kind of scale. I knew that master planning was not for me. I realized that the kind of really large, condo type developments and that scale of projects was also not necessarily for me. I needed something to be able to allow me to flex both my kind of interior and architecture design skills. I really enjoy working on the kind of interior details and millwork design at the same time as I do the kind of architectural massing and kind of envelope design kind of scale of things. So after MTA, I decided to join a small firm to experience a kind of small firm atmosphere. And so in 2019, I joined Labelle and Boulian Architects. I had a great time working there as well on a number of commercial projects that were actually for a prominent tech company that I can't name specifically, but doing a lot of office fit outs, some retail for this tech company, really fun designs, fast paced. But I realized I kind of wanted to go to a kind of medium sized scale office. And actually in August, I joined Super Cool, and I'm currently there and focusing primarily on commercial, cultural, educational projects in the office. And so far, Super Cool is a great kind of fit for me as far as the type and scale of projects, but also specifically the training and experience that I was looking for. I've been able to kind of land in a position that I'm able to get that. And essentially there's great leadership and kind of organization in the office that allows for good training, but also opportunities for leadership for each person. So I'm able to kind of feel like I'm owning and leading projects at the same time as working directly with an associate. So I have some lessons learned to kind of end off on. The first is, and I'm sure you guys have probably heard a lot of these already, but the first for me is really be your genuine self. Really embrace yourself and your unique perspective. You trust it, value it, grow it, find ways to kind of share it with other people. The second is make space for yourself and your interests and your needs and passions. I've often had to create the platforms and spaces for topics I wanted to learn more about because it wasn't really being done anywhere else. So why wait? You can kind of get out there and do it yourself, and others can benefit and join you. And the last is continue to build relationships and networks. We're all human, and I do remember, like, as a student, as a recent grad, it was really intimidating to kind of reach out to people, but really, everyone, that kind of one-on-one human interaction, you can't beat it. So I think it's important to kind of volunteer and network and try to just connect people on a one-to-one basis. And the architecture community in Toronto is actually kind of small in a way, and you'll find everyone is connected somehow. So just get out there and kind of and keep building that network. So that's it from me. I'm going to hand it off to Rhonda.
Thank you so much. Very excited for the discussion in just a little bit. But now introduce Sarah. So Sarah Rafson, who graduated from the BAAS in 2010, is an architecture writer, researcher, editor, and curator, founder of Point Line Projects, an editorial and curatorial agency for architecture, art, and design. A graduate of the University of Toronto's Bachelor of Arts in Architecture Studies and Columbia University's Critical, Curatorial, and Conceptual Practices program, She has worked on books with Kenneth Frampton, Bernard Tschumi, and Barry Bergdahl, and collaborated on exhibitions at MoMA, Centre Pompidou, Center for Architecture in New York, and the Parsons School of Design. She was awarded the 2017, 2018 ANCA Professorship in Architecture at the Carnegie Mellon School of Architecture, where she continues to teach and direct the school's yearly exhibition and publication exchange. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Rhonda, and thank you, Safoura, for such a beautiful presentation. I'm so glad that you guys paired us because I see so many crossovers in our work. So I'm looking forward to this discussion. Let me share my screen with you and hope for the best. There are no. Okay, can you guys see my screen? Oh.
Yes.
All right, slides are good. All right, so I'm going to tell you guys my life story, but in hopes that there are some students on here in the undergraduate program, I realized that maybe this is a little bit focused towards undergraduates because really my experience at the University of Toronto is a really important foundation for everything that came next. So what I thought I would do is sort of tell you a little bit about myself, go through the ways that Toronto directly sent me out into the world that I'm in today, and then also tell you about how where I am in my career is still a work in progress, and to show you the way that this career that I'm sort of creating right now is an attempt to bring together all of these diverse interests and projects. So let's go. To tell you about myself, I am an architecture writer, researcher, editor, curator, and teacher, as you heard in the bio. But I also like to call it professional architecture studies. I know that the undergraduate degree is typically sort of a stepping stone to something else, but really I ended up sort of loving the interdisciplinary nature of architecture studies, and in some ways that is really what I'm doing today. In 2016, I founded a company that Rhonda introduced, Point Line Projects. We do curatorial and editorial projects, books and exhibitions about architecture and design. And I'm going to tell you how this kind of came out of the work I did at U of T, but I also work at Carnegie Mellon University. I teach in the first year, I coordinate the thesis program, and I also direct this yearly exhibition, as you just heard, but it's a nice opportunity to sort of pay it forward and sort of also try to create an enriching experience for students, sort of with my own experience in mind. So you all are asking what's next, and I'm going to tell you how I got here. So I'm flipping that a little bit, but I have to say that there's a little bit of a formula to where I am today. And I think it's about 1/3 of it is I can attribute to the structure of the program that I was enrolled in. I'd say another third was a lot of hard work, dedication, and sleepless nights. But then I'd say the last third is sheer luck and just circumstance. So please take that into consideration as you hear what my life has been like so far in architecture. And also I hope it provides food for thought as you are forging your careers. So what I often reference this other formula that directed the architecture studies program at the time. Now this is ancient history now, this is 2010 when I graduated. So I don't know if this has changed at all, but back then we were required to pair architecture with something else. And I know a lot of
Sarah, I think your audio cut out a little bit.
Can you hear me?
You're all good now.
Okay, sorry about that. In 2010, back in those days, before it was even Daniels, it was just plain old AL&D, we were required to pair architecture with something else. And although many of my classmates tried to game the system and double major in architecture and architecture, it was really important to me that it sort of, the program embodied the interdisciplinary nature of architecture, the beauty of the fact that it is so connected with so many different types of discourses that you compare architecture with anything else and have a really rich conversation. And that really enriched our classrooms and our studio conversations. So I chose Spanish as a means of pursuing my independent research in Latin America. And similar to you, Safoura, I found that our education wasn't necessarily hitting all corners of the globe. And I found that this major was my ticket to an independent study that took me through Chile, Brazil, and Argentina, studying regionalism, and ultimately an independent research project on neoliberal policy and how it shaped their architectural languages in these countries. And later on, that would prove to be sort of a foundational project for me as I worked on a landmark exhibition about Latin American architecture at the Museum of Modern Art in 2015. So I couldn't have done that without that freedom to explore. So in addition to this combination of architecture and this Spanish, Latin American studies, I was also pursuing and experimenting in writing. Even before we were allowed to declare a major in first year, I had found this group of students who founded a magazine called Shift. And I don't know if it still exists, who knows? Oh, it does, nice. But I immediately joined as a first-year student, their intrepid journalist investigating the question of whether or not Robarts was indeed a monstrosity. So the jury is still out on that one, but we did end up choosing a lot of interesting projects. In a lot of ways, Shift was our sort of outlet for all of the divergent interests and sort of multiple perspectives we were bringing to the field. It was also in U of T that I was able to experiment with conveying architectural ideas to a wider audience. So I was a correspondent for the Varsity magazine. I only did 2 articles, but they kept on coming at me with pitches because nobody knew anything about architecture or why it would be relevant to a larger audience. And I had a great time working with them. So again, this is a tendril that is directly carried me through to today. I still write journalistic pieces about things that are going on. I'm trying to sort of convey a broader narrative about what's happening in architecture right now for some of these publications, but also it helps me feel more comfortable just with a more writerly voice. And so I still write pieces about architecture that have a little bit more of a historical or analytical or even at times personal, which is for me still kind of a scary mode to write in through publications like these. But then, this has really become not just a question of writing, it's always about the question of pairing writing with experience. And I've become an editor and sort of been working since graduate school. I guess you'll hear a little bit more about this, about the idea of sort of spatializing discourse through exhibitions and then sort of memorializing the ideas in a more sort of enduring format that the publication can offer. So building on that, there was something else that was really important about my experience at U of T. I mean, I, again, went into the degree thinking I was going to become an architect immediately afterwards, but I sort of took a little bit of a turn into the idea of fostering critical conversations. This was sort of my studio, my last year at U of T that went horribly right. It was a studio that we were designing. I don't know if this is still something that happens there. There was a final year studio where we were asked to design street furniture. And instead of designing street furniture for somewhere in downtown Toronto, we realized that how could we design anything without thinking about who it's for and why it's there and whose voices we're including and who we're not including in that design action. So what we ended up doing was becoming inspired by the idea of games as being structures that have rules, just like everyday life and everyday operations in the city. We took a the zoning map of downtown Toronto, and we turned it into a board game that we then played in the city as our form of creating kind of a dynamic conversation. We played it with the fictitious players, where we were sort of impersonating the different interests operating in any site in downtown Toronto at any one moment. But then we also, as you see in the lower right left-hand corner, we actually played with some of the real players as well. We took this to City Hall and staged the game there with a couple of councilmen. That was my senior project. I had no idea what I wanted to do, but the stars aligned, and lo and behold, I was able to turn a game design project into my first job out of school, coordinating a design project that was based on using games to teach, to help curb the pandemic of childhood obesity, which was in my hometown in Pittsburgh at the Carnegie Mellon School of Design. So after that, I still had this appetite for something architectural. I just knew I had to be back in the architecture world, and I didn't know what, but I knew this program was for me. It was the only one I applied to, and I got in, and it was, again, the stars aligning. Critical, curatorial, and conceptual practices, you can say that is just architecture studies 2.0. Something that did come out of my undergraduate experience was the sort of growing idea that maybe architecture could be somewhat of a boys' club, and the sort of awareness of gender disparities in our professions. And Columbia really provided me a platform to dive deeper into that, especially as we look at the history of architectural exhibitions and how our discipline reflects on itself and presents itself to the world. You know, going deeper into these ideas of exhibition histories and theories, and combining it with this history that I was learning about the feminist movement, and why there may still be disparities, but despite years and years and years of really interesting activism by women, minorities, et cetera, in the profession. So what I was able to start doing then in graduate school was to start seeing this not as a disparity, but as a chance to build on an understudied territory architecturally. I got to learn about all of these feminist designers like Susanna Torre, but also to sort of look at the different means that roles that exhibitions played in sort of creating a discourse around identity. So I love this kind of very banal architecture exhibition that was really kind of the counterpoint to the sort of Museum of Modern Art and the sort of grand narratives of our field at the time. I began to build a history of exhibitions from the bottom up, looking at these sort of exhibitions that were designed by women sort of at the margins of their offices, low-level employees who really barely made any dent in our history. So this phrase, caryatids, I'm just going to introduce it briefly. I can give you a whole lecture about them if you want, but this is the most fascinating group you've never heard of. Chicks in architecture refuse to yield to atavistic thinking in design and society. I saw this acronym in the archive listing at Virginia Tech University while I was looking for scholarship possibilities. And I was like, I have to know more. I Googled them and found this is a collective of over 70 men and women in Chicago in 1993 that put on one exhibition called More Than the Sum of Our Body Parts. It is an esoteric exhibition that I ended up writing my thesis about, and I'm still sort of digesting. Basically, it was an exhibition that used the language of feminist art at the time. Think like the Guerrilla Girls or Judy Chicago or any of these sort of artists that were much more prevalent in the art world, but they were using it to talk about their experiences with sexism in the architectural world. So I did an oral history project interviewing each of them, but also the women that they were sort of directly speaking to at the AIA, who they felt were ignoring their concerns. And it's amazing to look at the ways that many of these concerns in 1993 still resonate with us today. At the same time as I was going into these archival projects, I was also part of a growing organization myself. This was an organization called Architects, and it was sort of a loose collective, cross-generational group of designers who were sort of creating community around these ideas, especially coming out of the work of Lori Brown, who is a professor at Syracuse University. We were sort of looking for ways to sort of not only channel our experiences and sort of create new opportunities for doing things differently, but also to really reflect on why things are the way they are. And we did that by also putting together some exhibitions. And what you see here is Private Choices, Public Spaces, an exhibition we did at the Parsons School of Design out of something that we called a design action as a counter to the model of the design competition, which we felt is not reflective of or inclusive as a format. And so we were sort of proposing a new way of doing this by inviting reflection on the question.
Sarah, I'm not sure if it's just me, but I think you might have cut out again.
Okay.
Is it just me?
Right, let me see.
I think I hear you now. Could you try?
Okay, thank you for stopping me.
Okay, you're back on. You're good.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Did you hear about Now What? Did I tell you anything? Did you hear anything about that? Did I just?
I think it was, you cut out just when you were getting to this slide.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll start here because now we're sort of getting up to the present. This is probably one of the more impactful exhibitions that we've been working on. And this is part of the impetus from my current firm, Point Line Projects. Basically, we understood the history of activism to be something that nobody really knew anything about, but we're constantly involved in building. Actually, Safoura, you're talking about BEAT. Organizations like BEAT have been coming and going for years and years. And what happens is, like the caryatids, they kind of happen, everyone gets burnt out, and then they go into an archive if they get collected into an archive at all. So we designed this exhibition to travel, to teach, but also to learn about the history of architecture activism since 1968. And it's been going around to, it's organized as a timeline, it's been going around to schools, and I'll show you this crazy list of places that it's visited so far. But what we do is in each venue, we sort of pick up the examples of grassroots activism that weren't included in that list, and we're sort of compiling it into a book at the end. We're also intentionally avoiding identity characteristics in presenting ideas of activism because we are so often finding these examples being sort of cornered or siloed, gender, race, sexuality, etc. And so instead, we're trying to show the stories side by side through the impact that they had on these different facets of architectural practice. So it's been to over 13 places, traveled internationally, including to Canada, where at McGill, some PhD students led a beginnings of a Canadian collection alongside of our US focused project, but it's actually still traveling, and we're preparing to have it open at the Boston Society of Architects in Massachusetts very soon. It should be next, it says 2021 here, but it's actually going to be next spring. So in each, basically I want to say that we keep on coming up with more unique and really fascinating examples of not only kind of new ways of making exhibitions or making architecture, but really new ways of talking about our discipline, even as we look backwards. So I invite you to follow along and even get involved in this effort. We have a website there that is that has this kind of archive that we're building, and we're always adding more things to it. But yeah, so keep on that. And we are also looking for people to contribute to the sites for things that aren't on there yet. But this was sort of meant to be the main course of this presentation, where I talk to you about what I am, how I'm sort of developing this idea and the sensibility into my career, my firm as a project. So we do a really wide range of projects. It began as just books and exhibitions, but it's really become much more than that. And it's more centered on sort of creating compelling stories, meaningful work, and helping people navigate the competitive landscape of funding, publication, and exhibition opportunities. We sort of highlight a lot of the people that we like to work with in this in-house publication called On Point. But really what we're sort of building here is the foundation of something that can be very flexible and sort of meant to be uplifting to people at many stages of their career. I think all of you have probably already noticed that in your creative work, it's not just one thing that you do, it's all very much interconnected. So the idea that we were just doing books or just doing exhibitions doesn't really make sense. And what we're starting to do is create a much more holistic set of services that then we can use to sort of empower people, our peers, and what we say is like our clients and our colleagues alike. So in this gig economy, we are all looking for many ways to practice our crafts. And so what we do is we kind of create teams around the different projects that clients come to us with. But in the meantime, what we're doing is we're creating meaningful work opportunities for our colleagues or collaborators. So what we're trying to do is see this agency as not just a service delivery, but sort of the creation of a meaningful ecosystem in the arts. And actually, this summer and next fall, we are accepting interns. So I do want to put this call out for you because internships are actually a big part of that. Back to the idea of, you know, your dream job or sort of creating a vision of what a career can be after architecture studies. This is a pretty good one. We invite our interns into every stage of the development process, and I think you get a lot of on the ground experience that I never really got until I was in grad school. So yeah, with that, I will end and really thank you guys for having me.
Great, thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you both. I guess we can get started with some questions. And then again, if any of the audience member have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Okay, I'm trying to think what to start with. So maybe we can start with Sarah. I was wondering how, I mean, you spoke to us about kind of the different ways that you got into the kind of writing, editing, publishing, curating world. And it seems that a part of that was, you know, joining the varsity, but a part was also your grad program. I was just wondering like how you would advise that design students go into that world if they're interested in it. I know we have a history stream now in the undergrad program, which is quite small, but I know that the interest is there for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I remember asking it myself. I actually remember my last year, I scheduled a meeting with, do you know John Bentley Mays? He's an architecture critic. I think he was at the time at the Globe and Mail. And I said, how do you become an architecture writer? And he said, well, what are you reading? And the truth is I wasn't reading. I was just reading Shift. And I think that actually Shift was an important way to get started and something that I would definitely encourage. I really have been impressed, Rhonda, about looking at what you guys are developing with AV SSU. And I think that trying things while you're a student is the best way to develop a portfolio that you can then say that you are doing the thing that you think you might want to do. I was really scared to become a writer. I was really scared to publish anything, but then I realized that I was just kind of doing it, you know, kind of like when you sort of just decide to commit to something like, say, an article for the school newspaper or the department newspaper, you don't realize that you are already doing the thing that you think you want, you know. So the first thing that writer publications are going to ask you for is, you know, writing examples. In fact, I even ask my potential interns that I work with for writing examples. And coursework is good for that, but it's not the same as coursework. So I really encourage students to just try writing for anyone who is not a professor, just to try to get that that experience, that sense of what a voice is, and that's how you build it, is just by trying it out.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Oh no, we're getting a message from David.
Thank you. I didn't.
Very sad. But yeah, thank you for sharing. Safoura, a bit of a similar question, but different research area. I'm wondering how you would advise that students who are interested in design, kind of like contemporary technologies in design and fabrication, go about specializing in that area. I know that there are now some like grad programs that are pretty focused on that. But yeah, it would just be interesting to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, for sure. I think in some ways I would kind of echo a lot of what Sarah's saying as far as, yeah, school is totally your field, your playground to kind of experiment with the things that you're interested in. And I found, you know, as a student, having access to just the digital fabrication labs and the shop and everything, I wish I had more time to kind of play around with more tools while I was still in school. But I would definitely say that's, to me, it's like, you know, selecting the courses that allow you to gain those skills and experiment, and then you finding opportunities to create things and use those tools and kind of force yourself to like have to learn certain tools. I think that's another thing while you're still in school, because when you do go out into the world of 9-to-5 kind of practice, you know, all those resources, you have to pay for them. So that's one thing. And the other is, at least within architecture, there is only specific projects where you'll have the opportunity to, you know, create things that involve digital fabrication. Now, I will say definitely, I would say more and more, it's becoming more common for certain types of projects to have elements where we can integrate kind of digital fabrication within a kind of feature, design feature within a space, let's say. But also, if you're interested in like the parametric end of things, you know, you can use your kind of parametric knowledge not only to design like cool objects and spaces, but also to create efficiencies and kind of work processes, right, within the architectural practice. So let's say even in the world of like condo developments, right, creating a series of different floor plans, you know, that are parametric, that can adjust and shift as you need from project to project to project. Like there's so many efficiencies that can be created in the work process. So there is definitely, if you're interested in parametric design and digital fabrication, I think starting as a student, gaining those skills and then building that portfolio that shows that that's kind of your expertise. I would say definitely firms are looking for people with those tools, and you can contribute towards projects very easily. And I think that, as you know, technology advances so quickly. So students that are graduating are often pretty advanced with, like, you know, knowing the latest kind of tools and things that they've been able to work with. So that's an advantage that you have if you're interested in that realm of things.
Great, thank you. I guess kind of on that same line of thought, another question I know I ask myself is what to consider when considering the grad schools that we're applying to. I mean, obviously, I guess the program, the faculty, those are important things, but anything else that we might be missing? And feel free to jump in. I don't know if anyone has any immediate thoughts.
I mean, I would say for me, when I was selecting where to go for my master's, I knew that I needed to kind of stay within Canada, and it was ideal for me to stay local in Toronto. And that worked out because with my background in a non-architecture kind of undergrad, there was only a few options for me for a master's program in architecture. So, and Daniels, ultimately I selected Daniels because of the faculty and because I, in the back of my mind, wanted to also leave options open if I wanted to pursue education further internationally. And of course, you know, graduating from U of T, you know, U of T is a much more recognized institution than, let's say, some of the others in Canada. So that was something to consider. And for me, Daniels, at the time, there was certain programs that I was interested in that were kind of extracurricular, like, for example, designing, like DET, designing ecological tourism, that I was able to participate in. So I would say, if you're able to select a program based on whatever co-op or other alternative things, that's also something to look into, because that can really add to your experience.
Yeah, I love that, those thoughts, Safoura. And also I would just add, so like, in addition to the sort of locational and sort of logistical thoughts on graduate school, I mean, I did only think about, well, no, I didn't think of only just one, but I only ended up applying to one because I really think that in undergrad, I had really honed an independent path. Like this sort of the flexibility that U of T afforded me was really suited to this idea of independent research and sort of defining my own way. And so the idea of this critical curatorial and conceptual practices, a degree that was only 2 years old at that point, had that openness that I was looking for, because I knew that this is, Safoura, I almost, I really do admire people like yourself who are on this path to licensure. You had a defined goal in mind, and you knew how many hours it would take to get there. For people who are lost like me, I think it was the sort of the flexibility that was the comfort. The fact that I was looking at the faculty in this program and seeing people leading labs in several of my interests, meaning that I had lateral movement, potential when I arrived, and the fact that it was a small program, meaning that I would have individual attention. I mean, there were sort of these like very critical pieces in place that made it the right decision for me at that time. Not to mention looking at what the thesis projects were from the people who came before me. I think that's a really important way to evaluate a program. If you think that the language that the students are using in their thesis projects makes no sense, then steer clear of that. That's, they're sort of like, they're telling you what they want the output of the program to be. And you can use that as a way to gauge whether you vibe with that or not. So yeah, that's how I ended up where I did.
Thank you. Yeah, I think maybe people like me who have like too many interests and too many things, we should probably take the summer to consider all this. That's actually what my plan is, to just like take some time and process and maybe make some pros and cons lists. And then maybe I'll let you know what I end up with. But those were great pieces of advice. Thank you.
I think that's a great idea, Rhonda. And I know personally, I also took a year off between undergrad and master's. And I did mention it wasn't totally crystal clear that I was going to go into architecture at the time. It was like a strong option. I also spent the year applying to law school and like got into law school and decided at the end of it all that I needed design as a part of my life. And so architecture was the way for me. So, but like going through that process was necessary because it allowed me to kind of then be focused when I entered my master's program. So I really encourage people to take their time.
Absolutely. Working can be a year off, like working, saving up. One of the things that my dad did was set me down with the salary.com and the loan calculator, because the other thing is that I know less so in Canada, but especially in the US, grad school is a really expensive proposition. And you need to also make sure that you're on the right financial footing to make these decisions. And I also have sort of realized how sometimes master's programs, unfortunately, can be considered kind of like cash cows for the schools. I'm sort of seeing this from the other side a little bit. And I mean, that's not to anyone's detriment. It is a very important capstone to an education. Like this is a master's degree can be a very important step in your career, but to also be open to considering things like a PhD program, which can sort of get you to the same place if you are in this sort of more theoretical, critical realm, can also be one. There are other ways to get to where you want to go.
Sorry, my alarm went off, so I think I was set up to 8 p.m. instead of 8 a.m. But yeah, I mean, thank you. Sounds like my plan is a good plan. If I know we're hitting 8 o'clock as my alarm announced, I'm wondering if you have a few minutes for last questions. Yeah, okay. My next question was about your work and like related to equity, and maybe Safoura, it's also related to your interest in law, I'm not sure. But yeah, I mean, you both presented to us and kind of talked to us about your interest in equity, especially as it relates to the architecture and the design fields. And I know that many of us students are trying to figure out what path to take to work towards that, and whether we should do it through practice or academia or become rebels or activists. Yeah, I'm wondering if you could maybe tell us a little bit about your decisions and what your maybe work days or work processes look like. Sarah, should we start?
Do you want to get started, Sarah?
Sure, I can get started. Yeah, I grappled with that question because when I started my career a couple of years ago, no, but when I was out of grad school, I mean, I found that there was a very explicit break in my day. I was working my day job, and then I was joining architects and doing, running their journal, going to their meetup groups, etc. after hours. It was a very clear turn of events. And what I've been trying to do here is try to incorporate that into my practice so that we are working directly with community organizations. We're also working with architecture firms who have this kind of political leaning. And we also work with our people who don't share those same values, but that's sort of, it's all part of a practice that kind of like then sort of underwrites the more politically aligned project. That's the approach that I'm kind of trying to take now to see if, to see how I can sort of use my whole practice as the template. And I know a lot of really good people are doing that as well. And I know a lot of good people are doing it in other ways, which is, I guess what I want to say is I'm really hoping that there can be a sort of blending of the roles, that to be in business or to be a boss, it doesn't mean that you're giving up on your social justice agenda, that you can sort of bring that ethos and the sort of mentality into how you frame a practice. We are thinking very critically about how we bring in interns, but we don't necessarily compensate them yet at the level that we want to do. I'm still building a practice that really is truly aligned with the equitable model that I want to see more in the world.
Yeah, I think that's a great kind of perspective, Sarah. I think as a practice of your own, it's interesting. Often I think about that, like if I was to have my own practice, right? How do I blend all this into it? I think taking a step back, for me, addressing issues of equity, inclusion, diversity, it doesn't mean that you have to like dedicate your whole life to just that, right? Like it doesn't mean you have to become an equity expert. I really think that every person has a responsibility in whatever role they play in society to, live up to these kind of values where we are inclusive and we are equitable, because we all have a role to play in whatever our role is, right? And whatever kind of position or job we hold. And so for me, really my involvement started because I am a minority and because of my own personal experiences and because of what I saw needed to be addressed. And that's kind of how I've had to kind of create space for these conversations. But I am not an equity expert, when we hold events at Beat, often now as the issues we're kind of starting to get into, delve into kind of issues more deeply. We always invite equity experts, right, to be a part of that. But I think like informing myself individually is the first step. And that then connects to the work that I do within my office as well, within the architectural practices that I contribute towards, not only, again, how I live my life personally, but also I can then help be a part of that change within the kind of office that I work in. And I can say right now, it's super cool. Like we are working on that, right? We are having conversations about, how we can have what is an equity committee in an architecture office? What is the role of an equity committee? And really for me right now, my interest is as an architect and as a designer, learning more about inclusive design and what that really means and how that can be a part of every project that I take on, and really being mindful and intentional about that, because it's really easy when you have like developers running projects for that not to be a priority. So as an architect, informing yourself, I think is really powerful, so that then you can guide others as you do with other aspects of a project.
It's kind of funny, I guess, because as you speak, I'm also thinking about Sarah's presentation and the Now What kind of series. And I'm like, wow, all the connections. But yeah, I guess I'm mindful of your time. Maybe last up, I'm wondering if you have any questions for each other, not to put you on the spot, but this is your time.
I have so many questions for Sarah.
Likewise.
I feel like we need to have a video session together.
The Safoura and Sarah show. I'm ready.
No, I think it's interesting that you kind of mentioned the admiration of people who have this clear focus of getting licensed. But really for me, I don't know, maybe it's funny. I joke about this. This is totally from as a joke, but I feel like it's the immigrant in me that needs to get that license before I can allow myself to experiment with these other paths that I'm interested in. But also I think, I think it's a personality thing in some ways, but I do really admire people like yourself who have also taken, the knowledge from an architecture background. And I mean, there's just so much there's so much out there and there's so many interests. So I'm always really, I always really admire people like yourself who are starting their own businesses that are doing something innovative within design and performing these innovative kind of services that are not being offered, So I'm definitely going to be looking at your work, and I'm also interested in learning about the what's next and how we can do more with that in Toronto. So.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I think there's a huge Toronto story to tell there, honestly. Yeah. I think it's a really good one, which I would love to dig up. Even at U of T, mining the histories of our institutions. Safoura, I was thinking of asking you, I really admire the work that you're doing with Beat. And actually, I guess this is kind of part of that question that is coming up in my research too, is what is that moment like for you when you realize that you were going from being maybe just a designer or somebody who is just kind of going along to get along to taking a step to becoming somebody who is sort of asserting ideas and taking some action. Do you have a moment? Would you be comfortable sharing or what that was like?
Interesting. I think again, it's funny, because first of all, I think for Beat specifically, and I can't speak to this on a larger scale because I wasn't part of the organization from when they started. I just joined 3 years ago. But it's interesting because the evolution of Beat, like you said, it started so organically in a way. It really was a group of female leaders in the industry who realized we need to have these conversations, and they, out of their own pocket, kind of put resources to make it happen. And then there was all of a sudden this outpour of there's all these people who are yes, we need to talk about this. And there's such a huge lack. And it's funny because there isn't a strict hierarchy to the organization, which is kind of what makes it work. But also as it continues to grow, realizing that, everyone's volunteer and everyone's working full time. How do you make that work? There's just so many aspects of it. But I think I'm going off on a different tangent than what you asked about. That moment of like realizing you're switching. Yeah, I think for me, it really just, again, as a minority, like these are issues that I had to face on a day-to-day basis. Just being able to, and I realized that, you know, I need to join other people who feel equally passionate about, you know, addressing these things and doing something about it and being action oriented, and making space for these conversations. Really, for me, I would say from a young age, if in different kind of settings, I had to kind of do that. I had to learn to do that. So Beat is a great example of that. But I mean, I'm so admiring of the other colleagues at Beat, and kind of the work that they do, because we're each kind of focused kind of in different paths. As you will notice, like there's different kinds of events under the kind of organization, and there is slightly different focuses. Some are very much more network focused, networking kind of oriented, which is super powerful. And it began as a gender equity kind of organization. Myself, I bring and my two colleagues, Maya Desai and Stephanie, we kind of brought together this kind of diversity aspect. I don't know, it's a hard question to answer because I don't think there is a one moment for me. But I'm really actually interested in learning about, because I think as you're going through it, you don't realize, but I'm really interested in this concept of like, yes, there is so many organizations that start up and just fizzle out. Like, how do you make these things go further, longer? And I think that's another conversation that needs to be had.
Exactly. I love that. And that's where, you know, I think, you know, we can all reflect on our education and sort of like look at how we even learn about who came before us, or like what before Beat, what was there, you know. So I think there's a lot of learning to do, you know, all the time. Maybe others on this call might know, you know, but thank you.
Yeah.
But yes, so for the comfort with risk, that is such an important part of me being able to sustain what I do. And I think I would maybe emphasize that over and over again to anyone thinking of starting a business. I mean, even if it's a regular old architecture studio, to be able to have that comfort of representing yourself, and then also and you know, sustaining other people to work with you, sort of gaining trust. This is a risky proposition, and then to go in a different direction is even more so. So it's very rewarding, but it's full of risk, and you sort of find ways to cope with that, whether by sort of partnering with other organizations or having a strong set of mentors who will stay with you not only as you're graduating school, but a couple of years later. So I would advise anybody to feel like they can create a system of mentorship in the profession and outside of the profession that they can call on.
That's great.
Great. Thank you so much. I think we can wrap up here. But yeah, if you ever have that conversation about why the organizations end up, is it fizzle? Is that the word? Fizzling out? I'd love to listen in. Because yeah, that's something that we talk about even within just within our, like Daniel's as students, and within kind of like our equity related organizations or clubs. And it's definitely kind of important for us to keep the work going, but it's always kind of a question like, how do you do it? And all that, yeah.
Well, you guys keep doing a great job. I'm really impressed by what I'm seeing. So
Thank you.
For your work.
Thank you. So yeah, thank you so much, Safoura and Sarah, for joining us. It's been such a great learning experience for us, and it was a pleasure to meet you. And again, thank you to the audience for joining us today and throughout the year and our first iteration of the What's Next series. It's been a great honor to organize these talks and discussions, and it's been lovely meeting the speakers, but also working with our team. Juliet and Zoe are here, hello. Yeah, working also with the programming committee and the outreach team at Daniel's. So thank you all. You can find all of these on our little YouTube playlist if you want to rewatch them. We'll also be taking suggestions, and kind of we'll be putting out a call for more of these for the next year. And we hope that you'll all join us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, really nice chatting with you guys.